Hey, Pat McCardle with Polaris here, coming to you with episode 3 of Shop Talk. Today we're going to get into talking about control and suspension on the Pro XP. So, first thing we're going to cover is travel. Two ways to talk about it, wheel travel and usable travel. What the heck are those? So on this Pro XP, we got 17 inches of wheel travel in the front, 20 inches of usable. We got 20 inches of wheel travel in the back, 22 inches of usable. So I got a jack sitting out here so I can show you what the heck this means. But wheel travel is pretty simple. It's basically, if you measure from the top of the stroke of the wheel to the bottom as the suspension goes up and down, count the number of inches, that's what you got. As we look at usable travel, that's where things get a little bit different here. So we got to jack this vehicle up till the tires are just coming off the ground, and then we can show you what this actually looks like. So if we busted out a tape measure now, and we measured from the bottom here of the skid plate down to the bottom of the tire. So if we go from here up, we've got 20 inches of travel on this rig, of usable travel. And the reason that that's important on a Pro XP and most razors is that if we lifted this tire all the way up and got it to full compression, what you'd see is that the rubber actually stays below the main frame. So we're actually using the squish of the tire in counting into that total number. So why do you care about usable travel? Well, the nice part is it keeps the skid plate off the ground when you're riding on trails. And what you don't want to have happen is to be slapping the bottom of the frame on the ground, because that load then is going to transfer right up to you as a driver, and you're going to get the infamous spine tingler. And anybody that's ever experienced that, maybe on an older machine with less travel, you know that at the end of the day, you're just going to get beat up and not feel as comfortable and not be ready to enjoy some dinner with your friends and family. So some of the feedback we got at Polaris and Razor on the spring and shock package on Pro XP was from guys that put a ton of accessories on their vehicles, right? So they loaded up coolers and storage and roofs and panels and audio equipment and bumpers. And what happened? They started squatting the back end of these down. So the guys, the engineering team, took it upon themselves to go actually do a retune on the spring setup. Let me show you this for a second. So this is actually basically the setup that we ran for the first couple years on Pro XP. So you can see we got a big beefy mainspring and we got a smaller tender spring above it. And what would happen is as you loaded this shock down, that tender would start to squat down and collapse a little bit at standard ride height, and you'd actually start to lose some ground clearance. Well, with this new setup, you can actually see that we've still got a beefy mainspring. We've actually got a stronger tender spring, and then there's a tiny helper spring that's stacked up at the top. And a lot of people think of this as just a spacer, but let me jack this machine up so that you can actually see what that thing's doing. So as we go here, you'll start to see that that tender will open up and the helper will actually open up. And eventually, I'll get the jacks of the wheels are slightly off the ground. And you can see now what this helper spring is actually doing. It's basically taking up any of the slack, so when the mainspring and the tender are fully extended, that they're not rattling around and you'd have to worry about something falling off of this spring stack. The other things that we adjusted on this setup, we actually extended the thread length on the body down further and added these crossovers, the adjustable crossover in. So this is actually the point where we transfer load between the tender spring and the mainspring as the coupler here rides up against that crossover point. So why do you care about this whole new shock and spring setup? So right, we got new valving in the shock, extended the threads, added that crossover. Well, the nice thing is that you're actually going to maintain better ground clearance now, especially as you load up with your accessories and weight in the back of this machine. So you're going to maintain better ground clearance as you go, keeping it closer to that factory setting. Without having to worry so much about the back end maybe hitting the ground when you got a heavily loaded vehicle and you're riding on rough terrain. So for those of you who maybe had that complaint in the past, you know, this new setup that came out just at the beginning of the calendar year 22 here is a really nice setup with the mainsprings in the back, the tenders, and that helper up top to keep everything in its place. All right, so there's a few different shock technologies that we've actually run on Pro XP, including what we've got with this live valve technology from Fox on the DYNAMIX model on the Ultimate trim that we've got here. Cool thing about this shock, not only does it have that triple spring package with crossover we talked about, but inside it's got a bottom out cup. So this is basically the anti-bottoming technology from Fox, so that when that shock compresses all the way down, it doesn't hit hard on the bottom. It actually slows it down in that last amount and does the same thing on the rebound stroke. On the sport and premium models, we actually have something called a spiral groove technology now. So if you looked at the inside of the shock body, there's almost like rifle boring that's drilled around it to give some position sensitivity. So as the shock compresses down, it basically gets stiffer and stiffer as it goes, not just relying on the spring to do that, but actually inside the shock itself. If you go back to previous model years, we actually ran the Walker Evans needle shocks. Big difference there, it's kind of a one size, and then as you get close to bottoming that shock down, there's a needle that sticks out. The piston actually is hollow to allow oil to bypass the piston, and then as that piston gets into the needle, it actually restricts the flow and forces everything through the piston itself, which basically gives you that anti-bottoming, similar to the bottom-out cup technology on this Fox shock, and also gives you that anti-kick technology on the rebound stroke of that shock. So there's a lot of cool tech that goes into these, and I think next we'll jump into the DYNAMIX and show you some stuff on the screen. So jumping in on DYNAMIX, what the heck is it and how does it work? Well, DYNAMIX is a pretty cool technology that Polaris helped invent and develop back originally on the Model Year 18 Razor XP Turbo. That first model kind of had our Gen 1 technology. So I'll say a similar mechanical shock package, dual spring, had the bottom out cups, but was pretty basic from an electronics point of view, but for its time was really impressive. We came out with the Turbo S after that, actually added internal bypass from the mechanical shock technology, took a couple little steps on the electronics, and then when Pro XP came out, we actually upped the game on the electronics. So this is kind of like a Gen 2 electronics package when you think about the controls and how they work. So some of the cool things that we've got here that you don't see on previous models, we've got the steering controls built in on the right side, so you can actually adjust your mode with your right hand without taking your thumb off the wheel. So you got up, down, and that red X button. The other cool things is that go into this are, like in our first gen, when you went into a corner, we'd stiffen up the outside wheels and leave the inside alone. On these now, we stiffen the outside and soften the inside to help keep that body flat so you don't roll as much going through a corner. When you hit the brakes, we stiffen up the front end. When you hit the throttle off a launch, we actually stiffen the back to give you an anti-squat. So what does all that mean? It means you don't have to compromise. Instead of picking a soft suspension, a medium, or a firm one, you've got the ability to adjust it on the fly. So, if your terrain is changing throughout the day, or maybe your riding location's changing week to week, you don't have to go back in and monkey with your shocks all the time. You can do it right from the comfort of your cockpit and, keep everybody in the vehicle comfortable as you ride. All right, so the nice thing about this DYNAMIX system is I got all the controls right here on the right-hand side of my steering wheel. If I hit this red X button, you can see all 4 corners are going to full firm. And when I let go, a second or two later, it bleeds off. I've got 3 different modes I can choose from: comfort, sport, and firm. And you can see that all 4 corners adjust as I go up through those. And this is a 0 to 10 scale. That's important to remember. The other cool thing is that I can actually stack. So let's say I'm in sport, everything's at position 3, and I hit the brakes. Well, what happens? It stiffens up the front end. Now, if I go into a corner to the left, you'll actually see it stiffens up the right side. I'm gonna let go of the brakes. So you can see we can actually stack the cornering, the braking. If I get off, we can even do an acceleration where it does the anti-squat in the back. So we're gonna start out in comfort. First button tap I hit will pop up what mode I'm in, so I can see, okay, I'm in comfort. Second time, it's gonna go up to sport as I hit the up arrow. If I do it again, I can go all the way to firm. You'll see if I hit the brakes, it'll say braking. It'll put me at full firm in the fronts and give me the indication that my brake is on here on the lower left side. If I hit the red X button, you'll see all 4 go to full firm. And this is good both when I'm going fast and I see like a real rough spot coming, or even when you're going slow, say rock crawling, you need a little extra ground clearance. It'll actually almost jack the vehicle up. So it's nice when you're maybe dropping off a small ledge and you don't want the front end to hit too hard. You can just hold that button down, ride through it, and it'll stay full firm until you let go. The other thing you can do, you can actually see the accelerator position. So as I modulate the pedal, you can see it going up and down. And when I get to full throttle, you'll actually see the acceleration and the anti-squat kick in. As we go, we can also stack those modes, and real time as you're driving, you can actually adjust those modes down in comfort, sport, and firm. And you can see because I'm accelerating, cornering, it's stacking these modes. If I got off the throttle and hit the brake, it would go up, do the same the other way. So really cool tech. It's doing all this stuff in the background for you, but really easy, simple, intuitive controls right here on the steering wheel. When do you want to use each mode? That's a question I get asked a lot. Somebody that's new, never had DYNAMIX, should I be riding in comfort? Should I be riding in sport, maybe firm? And the easy thing I like to tell people is start out in comfort and kind of see what it's like. So hit that button all the way down till you see that big green C. And this is going to basically take as much compression out of those shocks on all 4 corners as we can do. but it'll still give you, that anti-dive when you hit the brakes. It'll still give you the anti-squat when you're accelerating off the line. You'll still get the cornering, as you turn the steering wheel into a corner. If you start adding another passenger, or you start driving at faster speeds a little more aggressively, or the terrain's getting a little more rough, that's when you're going to want to bump up to sport. So I tend to ride in sport a lot, and comfort actually. And then when I get into really rough or really aggressive driving, really rough terrain, that's when I'm going to bump it up to firm. When I need the most compression out of those shocks to begin with, and the fastest reaction of things like breaking into a steering event for a corner, it's going to be a little quicker reacting in the higher modes for sport and firm than it is when you're down in comfort. Comfort's really good for like cruising back to the trail, or like starting off for the day where you're kind of just getting yourself warmed up. Or if you just want, a peaceful ride with you and your riding partner, a lot of times I'll ride in comfort all day long if I'm just cruising wooded trails up here in the Midwest. So the nice part is though, when I get to different spots in the terrain and I want to change it, super easy, tap a couple buttons and I'm ready to go for the next one. So let me jump out of the cockpit here and just kind of explain to you guys a little bit, if you didn't have DYNAMIX, what would it take to set up your shocks? Well, the reality here is you do have spring preload adjustment, so you can crank down the top of the springs if you got a heavily loaded unit to, maintain that factory ground clearance. We also talked about those adjustable crossover rings. So if you need to, you can go in and turn that crossover ring and adjust the point that it's going to transition from the tender to that beefy mainspring. But if you have one of the sport or premium models, you're going to have a spiral groove with a QS3, a quick adjustment with 3 position settings on it. So you basically are going to have full soft, kind of medium, and full firm. And generally speaking, we ship it in the middle position. It's kind of all around use, so whether you got multiple people, one guy, whatever. When I like to ride, I tend to start at the most soft position if I got mechanical shocks and work my way from there. Because I'm probably not going to start out riding super hard if I don't know what the vehicle is set up for. If you've got a machine where you've got it heavily loaded with accessories, you got a lot of weight in that thing, especially if you've got a 4-seater and maybe you're going to carry 4 people a lot, then I'd actually start by adjusting the spring preload to go along with the weight of the vehicle. And usually that's going to be a pretty minor adjustment where you're going to maybe add a few tenths of an inch. All the information's in your owner's manual for basically every model we build on how to do that spring preload adjustment, but do that first. And then you're going to get into adjusting the clicker on your shocks. So usually, start in the middle and then either turn it down or turn it up. But again, like the DYNAMIX, I can do that on the fly. I don't have to stop, get out of my machine, turn all 4 corners, get back and keep going, which is painful for you as a driver, but it sucks even worse for your passengers that got to sit there and wait while you're monkeying around with your vehicle. When you go back to the older model years of Pro XP, then we actually had clickers on the Sport and Premium that had 16 positions where you'd start in the middle, and kind of for every passenger you add, you'd typically go up 2 clicks on all 4 corners. But you can really play around with that and adjust it to your liking. A lot of times what I hear from people is, hey, my machine's not riding as good as it was new. I'll literally walk up, crank it back to the factory settings, send them off. They'll come back and be like, whoa, man, what'd you do here? And I'll be like, well, you had the fronts at one setting, the backs were at another, and the left and right side were different. No wonder it rode terribly, because they were all misadjusted. So the biggest thing you can do if you do have passive shocks, make sure you start with all 4 corners the same, especially side to side. And then you can tweak them a little bit, like 1 or 2 clicks at a time as you work your way around and kind of re-ride the same trail a few times to kind of get what that feeling is like, so you can really get it tuned in as best you can. But again, the DYNAMIX system is far and above easier because you kind of just turn the key right and adjust it right from the steering wheel as you go. So we've had some people ask, like, hey, are the electronics reliable when it comes to DYNAMIX? Well, let me start in the back and show you what it looks like where we plug into a shock. So if you look up at the top, the valve is actually up here, and I'm going to pop this connector out, and you're going to be able to see what this looks like. So this is a fully sealed connector, similar to what's used on a giant earth-moving bulldozer. Fully sealed right up here. It's got a terminal lock to make sure the terminals are fully inserted and locked in place. We've actually got a 90-degree back shell so that we can ensure solid routing, along with this convolute jacket leading back to the main harness. So the nice part is this is well routed, easy to assemble. You got to ensure that it's put together right. And when it gets plugged in, you can actually hear it snap into place to make sure it's fully seated. And if you ever did have a problem, the dealer could actually, take this connector family apart, do all their diagnostics, put it back together, and get you fixed back up again. And I think, what a lot of people don't consider is the fact that there's actually a lot of, electronic technology on these vehicles already. You know, every RZR that's ever been built has had electronic fuel injection for many, many years. You know, we've got electronic power steering, we've got LED headlights and taillights, you know, we've got full infotainment systems with ride command. And by and large, you know, this stuff actually works really good. You know, we try and seal it up, keep the elements out, and make it so that it lasts, you know, for a good long time on your machine, and hopefully you can get out and enjoy it. Hey, that's a wrap for episode 3 of Shop Talk. Covered off on control, suspension, dynamics, all kinds of good information about how this stuff works, along with some of the changes to the latest shock and spring tunes. Make sure you click that like button, leave us some comments on what you want to see in the future, and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes of Shop Talk.